I'm not in my usual location. Apple have just announced some new computers. So I'm going to briefly talk about some of my thoughts that I have about the new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro with the M5 Pro and M5 Max Silicon. I'll make another separate video talking about the slightly updated Apple Studio Display along with the Studio Display XDR a little bit later on. But for now, let's jump in and talk about these new machines. I'm ArtIsRight. All right, so these are the machines that we have been anticipating for some time now. And just based on looking at information about the silicon, my speculation would be that this M5 generation, very similar to M4 one, Apple is designing each of these chip family independently, meaning that the M5, the M5 Pro, and the M5 Max are all separate design silicons. Unlike the previous, for example, versions or generations M1 and M2, where what Apple was doing was designing one and scaling that up. And for example, the M1 Pro, two of those combined together create like the Max and so forth. We can see that from the way how the multipliers are on the CPU and the GPU on the system. This is really done very differently on this one. So I think we're seeing like independent designs for these, which takes a lot more engineering effort, but now you can tailor the silicon a little bit more, which I think is really neat. And this also means that we may be seeing a independently designed M5 Ultra inside a Mac Studio as well. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but I think that's going to be rather interesting. Now, as usual, we're going to be getting some of these in. A couple other things about these machines too is that the new M5 generation on the Pro and the Max, all of the Thunderbolt 5 ports now have individual chip that controls them. So if you plug in a peripheral in there, you can get full speed on every single one of those ports instead of just sharing it like the previous generation. So this is treating a lot more of like the Mac Studio, especially like the Ultra Silicon, where all the ports have its own like controllers and all the ports are Thunderbolt 5. I think this is something really neat to see. They're really making these much more powerful machine now, and they're really caring about pros, so I like that. A couple of other things that I glean from this is that the display, the overall spec seems to be similar, but now you can also have the display up to 1000 nits in XDR brightness, so when you're using it outdoors. But one of the things that caught my attention is that this can go down to 1 nit brightness now in dark environment. So this means that Apple have obviously gone in and tweaked or changed either the mini LED backlight and also possibly the LCD panel. So we're going to get some of these in and definitely do some testing. And for the screen, you can get two different kind of textures, standard glass or nano texture, similar to what they have before. And there are a couple things too in regards to like the base SSD in the system. They have been doubled for both of them, which I think is something that is really great to see. A couple other things that I do want to point out here that I find interesting is that Apple is now referring to the CPU in two different kind of form. One of them is called the supercore, and there are a fixed number of them when you get to like the high end. For example, the M5 Pro, the top Pro silicon, and also the M5 Max, both the base and also the top silicon for the Max. You have 6 supercores. This is pretty much the same throughout, especially in the 16-inch model. And then what you have are just 12 performance core. I really want to know how these are going to scale and perform in the creative app that we're using. Are these supercores really going to enhance the performance? And are these 12 what they call performance core, are these just the performance core or the efficiency core? And like the previous generation, I think that we're going to be able to see some of these scaling that I think are going to be rather interesting. The number of CPU cores have also doubled. We're going to go into the configurator of this in just a moment. Now, Apple always listed the memory bandwidth, and I'm going to tell you right now that that's a metrics that's really good to know. It doesn't really matter in the real world workflow quite as much. I would just say configure the system that you need. Now, if you think the memory bandwidth matters, yes, it does, but majority of the apps we're using right now, let's be real, even majority of Adobe Creative App right now really just goes in and use CPU, GPU, and maybe the media encoder. The NPU is not even being used, so you're not even going to be saturating that, because in order for you to saturate that, you have to use them all at once. Now this time around, I think there are some improvement in the media engine as well. I'm really curious to like test that out, but AV1 decoding is now like standard on those. And let's just jump into the configurator and talk about these machines a little bit. So we're going to first take a look at the 14-inch model. You have two colors. We're going to go with space black, and for now, what I'm going to do is just choose the standard display. Now, the one I'm configuring for my own personal use, that one's definitely going to have the nano texture display. I made a video talking about that already. my big thing about that, and the key takeaway from that is, if you can get your picture to, or your images or your edit to look good on a matte display, it's always going to look good on any glossy display out there. It's just that the perception is different. The color output of it is the same, but we're just seeing that kind of like diffusion that's happening, which is actually kind of reducing the contrast that we see through our eyes, and also color saturation. But we're really not here to talk about display right now. All right. So you have the option for the M5. We talked about M5 already, but when it comes to like the M5 Pro on the 14-inch model, there are a couple of things. So there is the included one with 15-core CPU and 16-core GPU. You can update this to an 18 and 20. Now, whether you spend this extra $200 and you're going to see this performance increase or not, it's going to be very little. That I personally would just take this performance, this $200 increase, and update the memory in the system. Now, if we do that, I'm going to select the base one right now. It comes with 24, but I can certainly update this to 48. Now, if I want to get to the top of this at 64 gigabytes of memory, I have to go in and update it, the silicon, first before I can do that. And now the 64 gigabytes option. Now there are other options as well, but the moment I click on those other options is now going to push me to go towards a super high-end machine, which is the Mac Silicon. So just something to think about there. I'm going to collapse this down and just quickly show you the SSD storage. It's now 1 terabyte. In the previous generation, Pro always come with 512. I personally think this is really great just because you get more storage anyway. I mean, storage is just something that I always value. And the other thing that you're going to note too is that the price for the storage bump have decreased a little bit from the previous generation. As far as how much, I need to go back and take a look at that data again. But if we take a look at this base machine from where it is, price-wise, I think we're looking at a pretty good price. I think this price may have actually come up a little bit from like the previous generation one to accommodate for the increase in the SSD size that Apple is actually putting on the system. But now what I want to do is quickly go into the Mac chip. Now the Mac chip you're looking at, or the Mac Silicon, you're looking at very similar stories where the CPU core, very similar to the Pro, you're looking at 18 CPU core on there on the top one. The CPU core remains the same. So my point here is that if you're using tasks that require CPU, I don't think that the performance between any of these, once you get the top Pro versus any of these Mac Silicon, are going to change much. What's going to change though is the number of GPU, where you're almost doubling it on the system. So for instance, on the Pro one, you're looking at like 20 or 16 or 20, and now you're really doubling this to like 32 or 40. When you're really taking a look at this number, I think what we're going to see is the performance on many of the tasks that use the GPU that are going to bump. Now, whether you go from the base Mac Silicon to the top Mac Silicon and adding those 8-core GPU, you're going to see a difference or not. I think you're going to see some export reduction, or export time or task reduction, but I don't think it's going to be quite as significant to justify the price. Now, the reason why you want to do that though is that if I select just the base Silicon right now, you can see that I am at 36 gigabytes of memory and I can't bump this up. If I want to bump this up, I have to unlock the Silicon first. It bumps me up automatically from 36 gigabyte to 48 gigabytes of memory, and now I have the option for 64 and 128 gigabyte. And SSD for this particular Mac Silicon, it was 1 terabyte before, now has been updated to 2 terabyte. This is something that I really like to see because, I mean, 1 terabyte is really, you know, fairly tight, claustrophobic for me. I have a lot of files, right? So this is pretty much the 14 one. Let's go to the 16-inch right now. Similar story. So for instance, if we go with the Pro, now interestingly enough, when it comes to 16, very similar to the previous generation, there's only one variant for the Pro. You have the top one, you can't really choose the base. So that's the thing. And then this one also opens up one more thing, and that is 64 gigabytes of memory. So if you want 64 gigabyte memory, well, obviously because you have a top Silicon, you have that. And it also has 1 terabyte SSD included in that price, but you can also certainly go up and update this to up to 4 terabyte. If you want the 8 terabyte option, you have to go with the Mac Silicon. Now, when you choose the Macs, again, you have the two dilemma. You have the standard base option, 36 gigabytes of memory, and you can't bump this any more than that. Now, with regards to the SSD though, you can go up to 8 terabyte on this one, although it is definitely a whopping $1,800. That is really quite a bit, but hey, if you need it, you need it, right? There's nothing really stopping you there. If you bump up the Silicon, for that $300, you get 8 more GPU cores, which I don't think it's going to translate to much. That's just my personal thought, and from what I've seen in the past, from the trends and everything, you get 48 gigabytes of memory, and this unlocks 64 and 128 gigs. As far as the SSD storage go, these are pretty much all the same. So yeah, these are a couple of thoughts about the configurator. I think it's rather interesting the way how they're doing the silicon. It's very similar to the previous generation. At one point, I heard in the beginning that Apple is going to do this new Fusion Core thing where they're separating CPU and GPU. I thought that they're really going to have like a lot more options for like the CPU selection, but it doesn't seem like we have that much more. So I'll be getting many of these machines, and I'll be ordering many of these machines in during the pre-ordering, which might already happen once this video launch. If that's the case, that's perfectly fine, but hopefully this guides you your decision into choosing your machine a little bit. And as usual, and when I tell anyone to get these machines, think about how much memory you need for it. Start with that. I think that's a really great baseline to start, because you're going to see a much better performance gain from bumping up the memory rather than going up, for instance, like the chip family or the variants inside the chip family itself. By bumping the CPU and the GPU core, most of the time you're going to see very little performance gains for the price point that you're going to see much more when you really just go in and update the memory on the system. So that's just some of my thoughts on that. Anyway, hope you find this helpful. Give this a like, subscribe, hit the bell. I'm Art, and I thank you for your time.